They told him he didn't belong in first class and forced him out. Hours later, the truth about who he really was left the entire world in shock. Marcus Reed walked into the airport with the quiet confidence of a man who had earned every step he took. At 42, he was one of the most successful CEOs in the tech industry, a man who had built his company from scratch and turned it into a global powerhouse. Yet to anyone passing by, he was just another traveler in a suit, carrying a simple black briefcase. He moved through the check-in process with ease, his ticket showing first class, seat 2A. Boarding the plane, he offered a polite smile to the attendants before settling into his spacious leather seat. He placed his briefcase beneath him, already thinking about the speech he would deliver in New York, where he was set to receive an international award for leadership. But soon, Marcus noticed the shift in the air. Passengers around him exchanged glances, whispers floating just loud enough to reach his ears. Their looks carried doubt, as though his presence in first class was out of place. A flight attendant approached, her expression caught between professionalism and suspicion. "Sir, are you sure this is your seat?" "This is first class," she asked gently but firmly. Marcus remained calm, handing her his ticket without hesitation. She studied it longer than necessary, as if searching for a flaw. From across the aisle, a man muttered, "Some people just don't know their place." Marcus heard every word, but he didn't respond. Instead, he leaned back, steady and composed, his face unreadable. He had been through this before, the silent judgments that weighed heavier than words. Still, he chose patience, unaware that this ordinary flight would soon become the moment that defined not just his journey, but his legacy. As the cabin doors closed and the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus tried to distract himself with a magazine, but the unease around him only grew heavier. The whispers in first class had become sharp stares, eyes lingering on him as if his very presence was a mistake. Before long, a flight attendant returned, this time with her supervisor at her side, holding Marcus's ticket between her fingers as though it were counterfeit. "Sir, I need you to step into the aisle while we confirm a few details about your seat," the supervisor said, his tone clipped and cold. Marcus felt the familiar burn of frustration rise inside, but he stayed calm, standing tall and placing his magazine neatly on the seat. All eyes were on him now. Some passengers smirked, others shook their heads with knowing looks, as if they had expected this moment all along. The supervisor examined Marcus from head to toe before asking in a condescending tone, "This ticket was purchased under your name?" Marcus reached into his jacket, pulling out his boarding pass and government-issued ID. His voice was steady as he replied, "Yes, everything is in order." Yet, the supervisor frowned, whispering to the attendant as though Marcus's very existence in first class needed further verification. From across the cabin, a man scoffed loudly. "First class isn't for everyone." Marcus heard it clearly, his pride pierced by the words, but he kept his composure. He looked directly at the supervisor and said evenly, "You are making a mistake, but it's up to you to decide how big of one." His quiet confidence unsettled the man, who hesitated, unsure of his ground. What Marcus didn't know was that this moment, captured by watchful eyes, was about to spark a storm far bigger than the cabin itself. The tension inside the cabin grew heavier with every second as Marcus stood in the aisle, his daughter Maya clutching his hand tightly, her wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. The supervisor finally cleared his throat and said, "Sir, I'm afraid you'll need to move to economy until we verify this matter." His words hung in the air like a judgment already passed, and a few passengers murmured their approval, their faces smug with silent satisfaction. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm, though inside he felt a storm raging. He bent down slightly to Maya and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart," before straightening with quiet determination. His voice was calm but firm as he answered, "I paid for this seat. I have every right to be here. If you believe otherwise, call your captain and airport security, but I will not move simply because my presence makes some people uncomfortable." A hush fell over the cabin, his words cutting through the whispers like a blade. A passenger across the aisle rolled his eyes and muttered, "He's just making a scene," while another passenger, a woman in the corner, discreetly raised her phone, recording every word. Marcus's posture remained steady, his hands still gripping Maya's protectively as he added, "Right now, you are teaching my child that her father can be humiliated for nothing more than the color of his skin. Is that the lesson you want her to remember?" The supervisor froze, visibly shaken by the weight of Marcus's words, and the once smug whispers in the cabin now turned uneasy. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided his gaze entirely. In that heavy silence, Marcus knew this was no longer about a seat. It was about dignity, justice, and the example he refused to let his daughter forget. The supervisor hesitated, clearly torn between his pride and the undeniable authority in Marcus's calm defiance. Passengers who had once smirked at the scene were now leaning forward, sensing that something bigger was unfolding. The air was tense, heavy with anticipation, when suddenly a young woman in a sharp business suit, seated a few rows back, raised her voice. "I saw his boarding pass," she said firmly. "He's in the right seat." All eyes snapped toward her, the courage in her words slicing through the silence like lightning. Another passenger, still filming on his phone, added, "This is harassment, and it's happening in front of his child." The supervisor's face reddened, his confidence slipping as murmurs spread through the cabin. Murmurs of support this time, not judgment. Marcus stayed seated, his arm protectively around Maya, who clung to him but watched with wide-eyed pride. He met the supervisor's stare and said evenly, "Please tell me, what exactly am I guilty of other than sitting in the seat I paid for?" The weight of his question made several passengers nod in agreement, while others shifted, uncomfortable with the truth staring them in the face. The supervisor stammered, searching for authority he no longer had, when another voice rang out. "This needs to be seen. People should know what's happening here." The woman recording lifted her phone higher, making it clear the world outside the plane would soon witness everything. Panic flickered across the supervisor's expression as whispers of lawsuit, media, and career ending traveled down the aisle. The tension broke completely when the captain himself arrived, his expression sharp as he asked, "What's going on here?" The cabin fell into uneasy silence, and for the first time, the balance of power had shifted. Marcus was no longer the one on trial. The truth was, the captain's presence cut through the tension like a blade. He scanned the scene quickly, his eyes narrowing as the supervisor stumbled through a shaky explanation. Without hesitation, the captain took the boarding pass from Marcus's hand, glanced at it once, then turned sharply toward the supervisor. "He is in the correct seat," the captain declared, his voice firm and final. A stunned hush fell over the cabin, but this time it carried a different weight. Not suspicion, but shame. The supervisor's face drained of color, realizing his mistake had not only humiliated a passenger, but had also unfolded in front of dozens of witnesses, some still recording every second. Marcus stayed calm, his daughter still nestled against him, her small fingers gripping his sleeve. He leaned down and whispered, "It's okay now, Maya," and her worried expression finally softened. The plane lifted into the sky with a silence that felt heavy, every passenger now aware they had witnessed something larger than a seat dispute. Hours later, when the plane landed, the video had already spread across the internet like wildfire. Headlines screamed of injustice, and Marcus's quiet dignity was praised by millions around the world. Days later, standing on stage at an international leadership conference, Marcus spoke not just as a CEO, but as a father and as a man who had endured what many still endured every day. "That flight wasn't just about me keeping my seat," he said, his voice steady and strong. "It was about proving that dignity and equality cannot be stripped away by ignorance or prejudice." The audience erupted in a thunderous applause, but Marcus's gaze found only Maya, smiling proudly in the front row. For her, and for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, he had turned humiliation into hope. If this story inspired you, show your love by liking and commenting your thoughts. Subscribe now to Blax Stories for more powerful stories that touch hearts and change minds.